Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. You are about to join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Welcome to episode 67, August 10th, 2019, Womb Grief, Bringing the Heart Home and Connecting with Spirit Baby. How does grief change your life? Why is it important to grieve a miscarriage and other later losses? What does grief teach us? How does the body receive grief? Grief sucks, yes. Let's just get to the truth of it. This is going to be all about that connection of grief. And it's so, I feel like, aligned to where my energy is because I've had grief in my life. I actually celebrated my brother's would have been his 46th birthday yesterday. And of course, I took that day off to be in nature, to connect, to see how I would feel and what my energy was like. And today I meet his wife and we eat at his favorite restaurant to celebrate his birthday. And little did they know I'm bring some little gifts for everybody. Why not? How can you have a birthday without presents? And of course, sweet cake. I'm a big advocate that everybody deserves some kind of sweet cake, even if it's the divine sweet cake, that we are still in honoring. And even though we are in honoring spaces, that we still feel the heaviness, the sadness, the anger, the sorrow, the joys, the tears. It's very in the moment, I guess you can say. And so usually I do a podcast every Friday, and I really wanted to get it together the day before, but this is where it's at. And I feel like there's so much information, especially with online support, books. Oh my gosh, so many books on grief. And who has the best book on grief? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out myself as I am reading through. I want to say fully reading through books. If I had that much time, I wish I did. I have a lot of books about grief that have a lot of bookmarks in them, and I kind of slowly read through them. But I'm also in a training this year as a death midwife, and it has 3 parts to it. It has a internship component, and it has, required reading. And some things you want to read, and you're like, oh, some things are just so, not wanting to read. And I really love the reading that I'm being offered because they're all very different books. They're not the same. So it just shows you grief and death and how there's so many different interpretations, philosophies, doctrination, religions that all have a different idea. And then it makes you kind of step back and look at the larger connection of death and dying and the after, the before, and the grief. Someone well known in the grief field as what do they call him? The grief walker, a death walker. He has a lot of books. You can YouTube Stephen Jenkinson. A lot of people really love him, and he speaks very, very bold and very transparent and very real about questioning and being in the curiosity of death and what his own experience is with the different experiences that he's had of death, from children to adults to older to sick to, shocking, maybe unplanned deaths. But this quote I'd like to share. It's really aligned with grief. Grief is not a feeling, it is a capacity. We are not on the receiving end of grief, we are on the practicing end of grief. And some say, and there's so many different interpretations of grief and how people feel and what their personal reflection is with it. I don't feel like there's one way to grieve or there's one way to be. And of course, there's a lot of myths around grief, and I've spoke those many times with my co-collaborator who also is studying death midwife, who I've done a podcast before with Saoirse, how we sit and group together more physically, locally within the community for men and women to just talk about, it's a grief circle. And we create this altar and this space to talk about grief, but we always talk about the myths. I'm not going to go into the myths right now, but there's a lot of myths, and there's a lot of pressure around the myths. Like you're supposed to grieve a certain way, or, there's an ending, or, and it's really good to sit with yourself, to look at these questions, to look at these myths, to just allow yourself to be in the energy of grief. And you're in it if you've had, losses in your life, whether, of course, there's something about the loss of human beings that feels a very deep level, but there's also grieving of career, of relationship, of life, where it's going, where it's not going. And so there's always we get little dosages of grief. But I do feel personally, it's my experience, I do feel like the death of a person, the death even of an animal, a pet, a fur baby is a very substantial death to me. It's a very huge grieving process, because now there's this soul and this spirit and this body that's just not present, and it brings up many, 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 many things, right? And again, so everyone has a different interpretation of how they see grief, and I know I've seen others share it in a way that, those that grieve someone or something is because they love so much, which is really beautiful. It's very poetic. But then I question, is that true? Because I do, this is my interpretation. I do feel like there are levels of grief where it can be extremely painful, and it could push you into a very dark hole. And how is that love, right? Being in the darkest pit, in the darkest hole of the shadow isn't love. And so I would question that. And that's that's me like pushing against what is this understanding of being in grief, and why is it that when we're in grief, that where does it go? Like, how does it change? And I only know my own experience, and I'm still in it. I feel like it's been a little over 2 years since my mother and brother passed away within weeks apart, and such different reasons, different experiences, but also having to grieve a mother and then having to grieve a brother is different, because it's a sibling, and then it's my mom. And so it just brings up, let's just say it brings up tons of stuff. And I used to believe grief. My first real grieving experience was with my cat. And it was very shocking to me. It was very traumatizing, because I was like, what is this feeling? And I was alone, I remember. It was for this week, and I actually helped her die. I guess you could say I midwifed her into death, because I energetically felt her communicating, connecting me in a certain way. And I listened to it. That's what I did, even though I was terrified and scared. I used to believe, again, that grief was this kind of poison that would ache and hurt inside. Imagine if you took a poison, you'd feel your body like crippling and tightening, but this poison is never ending, huh? So then it makes me realize that it's something more than just poison. And I felt like, grief would be this dark kind of shadow that just kind of shifts over you, and then you get trapped by it, and then you move around it. But I do feel like grief does move all the time. It's like a wild spirit of emotion and energy, because it doesn't want to be controlled. It doesn't want to be manipulated. It doesn't want to be even deflected or pushed back. It wants to be. Wants to be with you and a part of you, and you have to let it be. It may be tears, anger, sorrow, pain, suffering. I was actually just reading from this book. Ooh, this would have been a good thing to share. Now I'm going to leave you on the edge. And I'll share it probably, in another episode, but it just talked about how the world around you kind of triggers grief. You see something, either a symbolic reminder, you hear a word, a sound, and you connect it back to that person and a possibility, especially when it comes to babies, right? Oh, my baby would have been 1, she would have been 2, she would have been 3, 5. You see those things and you feel them because you're supposed to. You're not just supposed to ignore and pretend that nothing exists, right? And sometimes when we're in the space of grief, we do need more assistance. We do need more connection, whether it's meds, right? Some people do need meds or even therapies, holistic therapies, conventional therapies, because coping, right, is the word we use, coping. I don't know if I like that word, but I guess it's a word that's valuable, that we have to cope. It almost feels incomplete even when I say that. And we don't, we may not know the fullest understanding of why this loss happens, especially early loss of miscarriage, later loss of stillbirth, or even later losses beyond stillbirth into infant loss. And, I do feel that grief can be dangerous for some. I use the word dangerous, which sounds like a really big deal, because I feel like it is. It can be dangerous. And when I use those words dangerous, I'm talking about depression, severe anxiety, right? That can be very dangerous. And that's where I feel like it would have a very shadowy, deep, darker energy, because if you're in a space of depression, connecting to your grief, or you're in severe anxiety, that's not a way to live life. It's not about the perfect life or the perfect connection, right? Because when we're in grief and we want to just get out of it, right? Sometimes we want to be in it too. Sometimes we're like, oh, I'm just going to be in it because this is what's serving me right now. And this is why I feel like when we have, again, looking at grief as this emotional, but this energy, like it's its own kind of force, and it's a part of you, and you're just kind of being with it. You're not working to resist it, to hide it, to deny it. You're just like, oh, is it moving in tears? Is it moving in movement? Is it moving in this way? How is it moving through you? And you're just acknowledging it. You're bringing an awareness to it. I do feel like, in grief, it does live in the energy field, and I was going to talk about that. When it's more active, I should say. So I would say recently, in the past week, there's been a lot of this. I love this, right? This is talk about synergy and energy here. Is that sometimes when women are coming into my space, couples, mostly women this past week, there's a very similar quality of energy between the people. And this past week was a lot of, and it's probably also reflective of my energy, moving into a birthday energy of grief. What am I attracting? What is my vibration then putting out? And I'm open to receive that. And in the past week, excuse me, in the past week, I've seen a lot of women with miscarriage, multiple miscarriage, but not just that, also trauma from early life, physical, emotional, sexual, and, moving into pregnancy, dealing with multiple levels of loss, grief. And so it's just, again, an interesting observation that where my energy goes, it builds around that, and how there's such commonality between also other people's energies and how they're showing up. And some of these connections of grief, especially in the energy body, I feel like when I'm scanning the energy body, it's in different places. Again, I sense more of an active grief, not an ongoing, because I do feel like everybody has grief inside them. It's a part of them. And sometimes there's a more of an activation around it. And so when I see grief, where I see it typically, and I don't want to say it's just in these parts of the energy field, because when I'm looking at the energy field of what I would call my spirit baby, soul baby communication sessions, which are very different than the medical intuitive soul baby sessions. And so the hour session is a little kind of a snippet of energy where you're at. And where the other one is a lot longer, and I'm really hanging out, because there can definitely be residual energies and deeper things that are happening. And so in this kind of intuitive peak, I feel like when I see grief kind of show up, typically in the crown and the third eye, I've seen it a little bit in the heart and sometimes in the womb. And not to say that it couldn't be in the center of the solar plexus or in the throat or even in like the feet or the hands, but this is just my observation. When I see that grief, I know that it's more immediate, that there's something that's very current around grief. And sometimes there's more of a shattering energy of grief. What I would say in the auric field to me is like, it's as though there's a pulsating energy around where it's like there's trauma and shock. And so that to me, I feel like I have to be very delicate, because I was like, I have to be really delicate, because right now the body is still in shock. It hasn't fully received just kind of centeredness, and the person could be kind of elated or kind of like, oh, everything's good, or, or kind of not sure, a little bit back and forth. And so it's very, it's a very fragile place, I feel, to hold that energy, because I know my responsibility of tuning in and connecting in that way is very vulnerable. I'm like, checking into the energy field, like moving into that space. And so I'm very conscientious of that. And it's very interesting because I do feel, especially with miscarriage, is what I'm seeing a lot of more recently, and why I've created a 4-week kind of series around it, because I do feel like there is this very sacred energy that really needs to be honored, that needs to be held, and needs to be talked about, needs to be looked at. I really wish in our culture, I should say our culture, I should say developed cultures, because more developed societies that have too much technology and, thinking that, everything's the smartest on that level, but not, have a way of just kind of, let's just fix it with technology, or let's just make it be a certain way. And knowing with grief, even with, miscarriage loss, stillbirth loss, infancy loss, there's no rush, there's no push. And that's what's hard, because we're in a culture that does push and heal and do it. I remember actually, after my mother passed away, an unstable person reached out to me. And I know this person, and they acted like they didn't know me, which was interesting, and messaged me privately and said they do trauma work, and that they were ready to get me out of the grief. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Very unintuitive, very like, probably ego-based, like I could heal you, let me do it kind of energy. I've never responded back because it felt really off. It felt very inconsistent. And it's just interesting because it's like, oh, there's that quick need. You have your grief, you have your pain, let's just sweep it up, clean it, and you're done. It's like, what is that, right? We're not allowed to be with dying. We're not allowed to be with death. We don't want to feel sadness. Our culture is very much, you have to be happy and super shiny all the time. And of course, we do want to be happy and peaceful and calm, but that's just not the truth, right? And grief lives in this other part of our own truth. And we have to be able to receive and accept that instead of pushing and fighting against it. And the environment is important too. And, I feel like how we cope, there's the word again, how we cope with grief really has a lot to do with not just our current life and how our family was raised, but also who we were in the womb space and how that connection of in-between worlds was, as well as past lives. A lot of people I see have a very hard time with coping with grief in this lifetime. If you feel the death of your child, the death of another, feels so deep and you just can't even, it's like electrifying inside you. There's some deeper past life connection that's either hasn't been resolved or something hasn't been really activated in a certain way. And so pay attention to that, because it's not like that for all deaths. And so if you're feeling that deeper activation, you got to go, oh, gosh, there's something else happening. And I tell people, do past life regression, experiment with it, go out there and see if you can find someone to connect with that. Actually, we'll do a podcast on that. That's a good one. I believe I may have found someone locally. And that would be a good conversation to have, because let's look at that. Let's look at that piece. You have to look at that piece. It's very connecting to your loss. And that's it's not all losses, not all miscarriages or later losses are connected to past lives, but there are some that are, and you do, want to look at that and feel like you've worked on that piece for yourself. And so again, grief, moves in different parts of your energy field. I do feel like it's just not the womb that's holding grief, right? And it's just all different parts. And even as I was talking about, like, how your coping skills of past lives, current lives, and, maybe you were born into grief. And this is a really big thing for me. I'm not sure I've shared it before or not, but I was born in grief. And it makes it a little harder that it was my mom that did have mental instability. So I get to swim in this pool of connection around stress and mental instability, as well as a grieving mother. And it was a few weeks before I was born, and it was my mom's, one of her, siblings. She was one of 8 or 9. I can't remember now. Maybe I always say 8 because he was 9, but because I've never met him in physical body. And she, you know, it was hard to lose her brother. And again, it was weeks before I was born. And so I get a piece of that. And of course, on a soul level, there's an agreement of that. You can't wait for life to be perfect to conceive and to give birth and to be pregnant. And tragedies happen all the time. And, you know, I'm a part of that tragedy. And it makes me wonder, right? Being born into grief, being born into death and to life at the same time, that is this what really shifted my own consciousness? Now that's bringing me to this other piece of my journey into death midwifery and even working with babies and mothers in miscarriage, and also working with babies through stillbirth and babies that have lived days to weeks in this world, working with their spirit body. I call that the afterlife of spirit baby. You know, working on communication, connection, building that awareness with their parents to get signs, symbols, building that relationship still on a level of awareness and spiritual connection. And so, you know, I do question that. That's, I feel like, is, you know, something to look at. Like, where was your energy of grief even when you were born or even before? And some say even if there's miscarriages. If your mother had multiple miscarriages and then you were born, if there's a stillbirth and then you were born, there's some energy around that. And it's just something interesting to explore. I feel like we don't explore enough of our birth world, and birthpsychology.com.org is a really great place to look at your kind of connection to who you are. It's not just about babies and pregnancy. It's about you from that sperm and ovum, that conscious being. Like, where was the consciousness of your family, and what was it's very fascinating to kind of go into that therapeutic place. And there are rebirths and ways to look at it. I actually saw it when I was in school with the adults, like really just looking and going back, and there's certain techniques and things to do to see and to get that imprint to be released as an adult is so quite profound, really, and really amazing. So how does the womb hold grief? So I want to talk about that because I do feel like that's important. And then, you know, shifting into a little bit of baby, kind of spirit baby connection and what that piece is about even. And so the womb does hold different pieces of grief. But when I see when I see grief in a woman's womb, I'm not like totally think it's that horrible, to be honest. I know that sounds interestingly, how could that not be horrible? Because there are other energies, I think, that are more traumatizing that I've seen in the womb space. And yet, with the womb, with the grief, women still conceive. They conceive with the grief in the womb. You don't have to have a completely cleaned out emotional palette. We are emotional beings. Your energy field right now, if you can close your eyes for a moment, all this energy moving around you, everything that's vibrating within you, there are pieces of emotion just moving, coming and going. You are emotional. It's not about making emotions go away. Some emotions can be bigger in some places, and what they do is their depth. It feels like it creates an obstacle, but I don't feel like it's really much of a block, right? I don't like that word block. Let's call it the obstacle, because the obstacle wants to be navigated. You want to travel through it, and when that emotion is so big and taking up that space in the heart, in the womb, it wants presence. It wants to be looked at. It wants to be received. So if you're feeling this heaviness of grief and you're disconnecting from your body, this is where it gets a little iffy, because I tell women, okay, why is there a disconnect? Don't disconnect. Be with the pain, be with the shadow, and understand how to be one with it, pull it in, and be present with it. So there is grief, of course, around the womb space. And of course, it's about how the mind, the subconscious, also holds that connection. And that's where you do the work. You do the work, you connect. This is why I love somatic psychology, and this is why I get to use a little bit of that and more the longer term work that I do with women. You know, because a lot of women always will say, I want to do more work together, and how does that work? And I always wonder if I'm just not being clear at times on my website. I'm like, okay, because I do more counseling and spiritual work and energetic work together. I'm not just talking to babies all the time, but that's a part of it. And we do weave that into these long-term kind of work, doing multiple sessions together. And so, creating whatever the healing space needs to look like, whatever the present space wants to be discovered, solved, figured out, healed. I feel like, though, when it comes to grief, and, there's no proper way to grieve, right? This is a hard one. Wouldn't that be nice? Give me the proper way to grieve, and I'll do it, and then I'll be okay. It doesn't work that way, right? And so I found, which I think is so phenomenal, nature therapy, right? Wilderness therapy. There's something about nature, and I'm going to tell you what that is. I feel like it's a missing piece. People say, oh, go outside and you'll feel better. No, it's so much more than that. And so I got to be very honoring yesterday. I did have an emotion all of a sudden coming up. I'm like, okay, there it is. I wasn't trying to make it happen. I wasn't sure where I was going to go with it. Went to the beach. The tide pool's gorgeous. The water's so clear. It's over here. That's a little bit more north. And the kids get to play in the rocks and see the sea creatures. And I get to see the way the waves move, hit my feet, hit the sand. And I get to just kind of be in my emotion with nature. And then nature doesn't fight you. And what happens is, especially if you're empathic, when you open your energy up to your environment, you can feel nature's life cycle. You feel that nature lives and nature dies. Literally, we have the seasons that happen around us. And I feel like this is an important part of working with grief, working with dealing with death in a really big way, is being able to be in nature more often than not. Nature is the therapy. Even better would be if I can go out there and have a therapist, a healer. I'm going to talk to you while I'm in nature, because nature is forgiving, nature is loving, nature holds you. And so even the ocean is great, lakes, rivers, creeks. And then after this, I went over to a nature hike across the way where there was more of a waterfall, but it was more like in the mountains with the earth. Again, opening the energy up. This nature around me, opening my energy up to her, is not requiring anything from me. I'm feeling the fullness, the vastness, really the unlimited potential, and how my body's now just scooping it up, just like sopping it up and just loving it, feeling it. It's not expecting anything from me. And the reason why I'm saying that is you're energy sensitive. Maybe you're highly empathic. Maybe you're just energy sensitive and not that empathic. But you're going out into the world with people, with items, with objects. Those all have a vibration. So that environment may not help you when you're grieving. You may not feel like it actually could help you in a sense to be a good distraction if you're looking for distraction. But knowing that, can you go and feel the fullness of who you are with nature as your co-collaborator on your ability to be with grief when you're feeling it, when you're just a part of it, and without pushing it away. I do feel like it's quite phenomenal to be in that nature kind of connection. And maybe you've had, again, multiple miscarriages, and you're just weepy and trying to figure out where your next energy is going, and being with nature and listening to your body and listening to baby. So this is really important when it comes to baby loss. Baby is with you. Baby is there. They have a lot to say, and I've seen this, and, you can ignore them. That's fine. That's up to you. But it's not going to make you feel better by ignoring your baby's energy. And you may be pushing against, well, I can't hear them. I can't feel them. There's a practice that you can build around it, and then there's space that you can just kind of center yourself and begin to listen and begin to see the signs around you. Don't judge them. Don't doubt them. Just be with yourself. You don't have to go to the news and share to the world that you're trying to prove something outside of yourself. Your proof is within you, that you see and you connect. And when you build your psychic sensitivity up, it really reflects all around you. It's not separate from you. And you get to continue to open to what that looks like and what that feels like for you. And again, it is possible. You can and you will, because it is calling to you, that your inner silence, that your need to find your wholeness and self-love, self-compassion, self-kindness is very strong, especially when it comes to multiple loss. it's crucial, really, because you are not a bad person. You've done nothing wrong. You are now present to dealing with trauma and surrendering to this next piece of your life's journey. And it's so valuable, and it's so mysterious. And again, there is no proper way to grieve, not one way. A few of the things that I feel like are important is honoring your heart, honoring where you are, and also honoring the other being, honoring it through ceremony, through ritual. There's so many amazing, beautiful things. And I've had babies share to me, okay, I need an honoring. I need a ritual. What is my mom and dad doing? What is my mom doing? What is my dad doing? What is my sibling doing? How are we all doing different honoring things? Or let's say there's later life where baby was cremated. I want to say after 20 weeks still, they offer more of a burial and cremation. And it sounds so big and so like, what do you do with that? But I've had babies say, I was cremated. What are they doing with that? Or I have a stone. What are we doing with that? To continue to bring the connection forward, to continue to bring the presence forward, to not separate. And I've seen people that bring in all the energy of their child into their space, and it's profound. It truly is. And there's a story I want to share, but I don't know if it's appropriate. And in a group that I saw where one woman had, they both had substantial losses of their daughters, and one was through murder, and one was through cancer. And it was just interesting to see the difference between these two people and how profound it was to see the woman with the murdered daughter who was such a different level of healing and awareness around, her grieving, but also receiving her child's spirit, receiving that connection and going there, not just going to a medium, but also going to her own space, looking at that spirit energy. There is such power in that connection, and not to deny it, not to push it away. And, it's okay to feel lost in it, confused in it, and be in the mystery of it, because there is so much that is going to be mysterious, but also you're opening to it. And so honoring your heart, honoring the connection, the spirit of your child, also listening. Again, listening. You can't listen. It doesn't work if you're not listening, listening with your heart, listening with your full body, listening with your ears, with your eyes, with your sensory system, and also opening. I feel like that's a proper way to grieve, right? You have to be open to anything and everything, and just experiment. It doesn't have to be for you. You go to a group and you go, okay, this is not my group. Or you go here, okay, I'm not sure about this. And then you kind of, again, experiment with what it feels like. How open can you be? Where can you go? And also receiving. I feel like opening and receiving may be a little bit the same thing. How are you receiving your connection with yourself? Because you are the vessel of communication. Your ability to hear within you is a part of you. And sometimes it is, again, a practice I feel like is important. And I have to share that I have this very private group, and I believe we're going into 6 or 7 months now, a very small little group of amazing spiritual women. I call it the monthly love circle, the afterlife of spirit baby. And this particular group has had loss in infancy. So after baby has touched and been a part of earth in this atmosphere for moments. And these women connect with the spirit of their baby, and of course they grieve, and they have these other waves of emotions, and at the same time they're so present and so open to be able to go there. And that is a part, I feel like, of the journey of building that spiritual communication, building that relationship even after life. And again, it is different. It is a bit, again, unknown, and at the same time there's a truth to it and a real tangible experience for mother, for father, even for sibling. And one of these questions I give to them in one of our very first circles, I think, was, and it's something for maybe even you to receive and reflect on all around this grief energy and connecting with baby. What does it mean to connect with baby spirit? How do you trust it? What does it mean for you and your child to create this connection? Is it your imagination? Is it grief influenced? How can you live deeply after losing your child? again, being with the energy of where you are, who you are, and connecting with your grief in a way that brings you to the heart of your own home, really, and connecting with baby's energy in their own specific way, because they are a conscious being. There is a connection there. You know, some people will believe, have different beliefs when it comes to miscarriage. And it really has a lot to do with our culture, because our culture tells us what we should feel, what we should think, how we should buy things. But there's something outside of the box, right? And I feel like this is where a lot of really deep spiritual insights come, a really happy, connected life comes, is that if you can allow yourself to go outside the box, even for a moment or many moments, and you begin to see that there's something else happening and there's a truth to it, and it's real. It's not a figment of your thought or fantasy, that something else is happening outside of this collective. And we're supposed to experiment with that. We're supposed to go, what is that? Let me see what that is. How do I go there? And sometimes we do need guidance and assistance. I know myself. As I'm expanding in my mediumship, I'm reaching out for mentorship myself, because I want to be able to be of service in a way that allows me to push into my own dark corners, that allows me to go into those next places. So wherever you are, just be. Allow love. Receive. Speak with your baby in spirit. Speak with your heart, your intuition. It begins as you just calling out, hello, my sweet child. I love you. I'm here. Hello, my sweet babies. Hello, I'm here. I want so much more from this connection, and I may not hear you as clear as I would like to, but I am open. And I'm going to just be in this space of receiving. And knowing on your lost journey, I am sorry you are suffering if you are suffering, and I hold you in the utmost purest of love. And I do send that golden light of oneness to hug you today and every day. And again, remembering, accepting your baby in spirit is an eternal beam of consciousness, and listen to that light. She or he, I know, are sending signs, messages, and more. Thank you for joining episode 67, Womb Grief, bringing the heart home and connecting with baby spirit. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe and leave reviews. Thank you for joining Spirit Baby Radio podcast this week, and please check out my newest book, Sacred Communication, a Spirit Baby Journal. Learn more about services and supporting people all around the world in private one-on-one sessions, online classes, programs, private VIP retreats at kellyannmeehan.com. Also, my newest website, spiritbabymedium.com. Thank you again for joining.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.